Buying a house jointly with your parents, we're going to talk about the pitfalls, the pros, the cons, and all the things that you need to be aware of in today's video. Starting off on the top, Jane, why would someone look to buy with their parents?
Yeah, Sarah and Andrew contacted me a couple of months back. They were looking at getting a new house. They're running out of space, they had 2 young kids, and at the same time, Sarah's mum was looking at downsizing and said, well, why don't we pool our resources, buy a house, a bit of a granny flat, we can kind of get more home, have less loan, and it sort of makes sense because someone to look after the kids. So they contacted us and said, well, can Andrew and Sarah buy with their mum? Is it possible? Mum's still working, she's in her 60s though, is there going to be a problem with the bank? And that's what we're going to cover in this video, because there are some pitfalls and some downsides to this. Some banks do have issues when you're approaching retirement age, and even have issues with different ownership structures. So let's start from the top, Nathan. What are the 2 types of ownership structures you can look at in this type of purchase?
Yeah, you've got 2 ways you can set up the title ownership of the property. The first is tenants in common. Now, this is more of a popular arrangement, particularly if mum and dad are contributing more of the deposit, or maybe mum and dad are just putting all their cash in, getting no loan, you're getting the loan. And tenants in common means you can actually split the ownership percentage. So mum and dad might own 60%, you could own 40%. So you can actually dictate who owns what percentage of the property. The second option is joint tenants. This is effectively an arrangement where it's 50-50 ownership of the property.
Yeah, so if it's a third, 3 people, it gets split evenly. Now definitely get legal advice on this, because we actually ran into an issue with Sarah and Andrew when they bought. It was them and mum, so 3 people on the title, and they went for the tenants in common structure. Now what they did, which was a bit different, was mum was going to own 60% of the property, they were going to own 40%, and the bank had an issue with this because they wanted everyone to have joint ownership. They didn't want one person to have more, because they said, well, there's financial hardship, there could be different duress, different things, and realistically mum's income didn't cover 60% of the loan. So check with your bank, obviously get legal advice on this, because if you're going to do different proportions of ownership based on your deposit, it could cause issues with the bank all the way to settlement.
And this is where if mum and dad had full cash, what they could do is become a guarantor on the property where they both own the property with you, but you go on the loan individually, and that can also make it a little bit easier from the bank's point of view.
Yeah, so from the bank's view, they would actually see, Sarah and Andrew on the loan, and in the background, mum is the guarantor. So at least mum's not having to make loan repayments. She might be retired. There are a few banks that allow this structure. And then in the background, the property is still owned in your 3 names. So it can make it easier if they're retired, depending on their situation, their age. There's lots of things that come into play here. So again, with this structure, you probably want to have some conversations up front, which we'll come back to in a sec. So the benefits, though, Nathan, of buying together with your parents, combining your resources, potentially getting more house for your money is?
So the first pro of doing this is you can enter into the market faster. In a lot of circumstances, you might be saving that deposit, you might be struggling, but when mum and dad get involved, you'll be able to get into the market a lot quicker.
You can also pool your resources. So when the bank is seeing 3 people, Sarah, Andrew, mum, buying a property together, they put everyone into one sort of household. So your living expenses, your electricity, all that stuff's kind of shared, all merged together. And equally, your income is combined. So you've got more income to play with compared to if it's Sarah and Andrew and mum separately, living in separate households. You've got different electricity bills, internet, that kind of thing, and your borrowing capacity is lower.
The third one is you can actually borrow less money, because if mum and dad are going on this with you, it means that you've got less of a loan that you need to pay back, less of a responsibility, which gives you a bit more freedom, a bit more free space to do the things that might be more important.
And you obviously share the responsibility of the loan. Like you said, mum and dad might have sold their house, they might have $500,000 to put in, you borrow the other $500,000, your loan's lower, and you've got a bigger house. But this is where the negatives come through. So if there are changes to your parents' circumstances, so they might need to go to a retirement home, they might have health issues, if they need to pull that money back out, that $500,000 out in a few years' time, you might not be able to, because the bank is going to want to see the financial information, all 3 people.
And this also, one of the changes of circumstances path comes down to, you might have different time horizons to your parents. Your parents might be looking to retire in the future and really seeing this as a 5-year play. You might be seeing this as a 20-year play. So once again, you need to be careful of those change in circumstances and the change in time horizons that might happen for both parties.
The other reality with this structure is you're all on the hook for the property and the loan. So if you've got a joint loan of $500,000, the structure I said before, Andrew and Sarah might have $500,000, mum might have none. If Andrew and Sarah stop paying their loan, they walk away and say, see you later, bank, I'm not going to pay this, the bank will chase not just you two, but mum as well for the money. So you're all joint and wholly liable for the loan and the property. If anything bad happens, someone loses a job in the future, you're all still responsible to pay that loan.
Definitely. And the last one is your borrowing will reduce, because if you, mum and dad, buy the property together, that loan will be in all 3 or 4 parties' names. So whenever you look to buy another property, an investment property, or even get a personal loan or a car loan, that liability, 100% of it will be in your name only. Now, there are things you can do. There's something called property share where you can individually guarantee each other. Get in touch with us if you want to know more about it. But effectively, it means that you can get your own loan that you're only responsible for in your name, so it doesn't affect your borrowing ability.
Yeah, we usually see this affect you if you're looking to upgrade your home. So if the intention is, I'll buy a property with mum now, we're going to turn that to an investment and buy in the future, it doesn't always work, because the bank will see that $500,000 loan, but they'll say, well, Andrew and Sarah and mum own a third each, so we're only going to use a third of the rental, but 100% of that $500,000 loan for each individual when you apply. So it can cause issues there. Have a think about that for the future, because it can tie you down.
Now let's talk about some tips for parents out there. The first is to get legal advice. It's super important, especially if you're entering into a co-ownership arrangement. You want to make sure you get advice around the right structure of the setup, the right sort of details you need to cover, and even having some sort of an agreement with your children or even with your parents to say, in these circumstances, this is what happens. Jaden, what else is there that parents or buyers out there should be aware in this sort of an arrangement?
Yeah, so you can potentially get a co-ownership arrangement set up through a solicitor or a lawyer to pretty much stipulate, what's going to happen if we look to sell, who owns what are the proportions, whose obligations are there, if there's a divorce in the future, things like that. It's kind of worth thinking about. And to that matter, having an exit strategy. So before you even sign up, before you, mum and dad, parents, uncle, whoever agrees to doing this sort of structure, have a think about, well, are we going to be here in 5 years? Are we thinking about traveling overseas? Will it become an investment property? Because you can't always assume the market's going to be how it is. Things can change, and you need to be prepared to change with it.
And this is where you want to update your will, because in this situation, if the unfortunate did arise, you want to make sure that all parties are aware of where the ownership structure lies or who owns what at the end of the day if one of the parties do pass away. Now, Jaden, what happens if this co-ownership with your parents doesn't work for you? Are there other options available to you?
Yeah, so it can have downsides. Like I said, there's limited flexibility. It can reduce your borrowing capacity. You're kind of tied to mum and dad in the same house for the future, which can be really good if you've got kids, but can be really bad if you want to have your own single life or what's going. So alternate structures are, firstly, going guarantor. So it can just be Andrew and Sarah, for example, buying a home on their own, and mum says, hey, I've got a property over here. You can secure a loan, use that part of the loan as the deposit, and you can borrow 100%. You don't need to put any deposit there.
Now, this is where the guarantee works really well in Andrew and Sarah's case. If they have good incomes, they don't really need mum and dad on the loan to help them with increasing their borrowing power. They're just struggling with the deposit. So that one, number one, the guarantor works well. The second is, if you're struggling with deposit, you can do one of two things. Mum and dad could potentially lend you money, or they could gift you money, effectively not asking for it to be repaid back. Once again, this would remove the requirement of a guarantor and could get you in the market, especially if you have a low deposit. Jaden, what's the third one for buyers out there that are looking for other alternative solutions?
Yeah, mum and dad could buy a property, rent it back to you. Potentially it's one way of doing it where it might be owned in their name. If they're still working, if they're approaching retirement age, there are different rules here. Some banks, when you're over 55 years old, will want to reduce your loan term and say, well, you're 55. Is it appropriate giving you a 30-year loan term until you're 85? Maybe not. Others are fine until you're 65. They don't really mind as long as you're working. And it makes sense. You might be doing a white collar job. You could be a lawyer, a solicitor, and they say, well, you could potentially work till you're 70. You might not want to, but it's possible. So there's different ways of doing this. Have a chat to a broker. We see this. We see different structures. And like I said, there's some banks that are excellent at it, and there are some that'll just decline you straight up.
Did you know here at Hunter Galloway, we help many parents and children buy properties together? Reach out with us directly at huntergalloway.com.au or call us directly on 1300 088 065, and we'll see you next time.